There it is. This hearing will come to order. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled Electronic Waste, Can the Nation Manage Modern Refuse in a Digital Age? And I would like to welcome our panelists who will share with us their views on the end-of-life management of the electronics that we all use and enjoy every day. Let me also point out that we are going to have a joint session later on, which is going to, unfortunately, make us either have to finish up before or come back after. So we hope I want you all to know that this is the start of this very important process, and we'll deal with it as the time comes. This nation started on the path that brings us here today in the 1940s when we began producing and buying televisions. By the 1960s, about 60 million American homes had TV sets. By last year, we were over 250 million. In the 1980s, we began to acquire home computers and businesses. Universities and schools invested in personal computers. Between 1986 and 1990, around 28 million personal computers were sold in the U.S., and by 2000, that number had more than doubled. We all own and use these electronic products, TVs, computers, cell phones, MP3, DVD players, but we rarely stop to think about what happens to all these products once we're finished with them. Today, the amount we have to dispose of is in the billions. We know that many of these products end up in our landfills or are sitting in our attics and storage closets because we aren't sure what to do with them. Innovation in the electronics industry has produced staggering advances, and I don't think anybody would want to turn back the clock on this progress. But we could turn the clock back on something else. We would want to ask the engineers who began using lead in televisions to shield viewers from the X-rays and ask, how can we come up with something better? Because now, in 2008, with the transition to TV signals fast approaching and better technology on the market, we have millions of televisions and monitors with untold tons of lead heading to the landfills. And these old products also contain toxins like mercury and cadmium. Fortunately, there is a growing awareness of recycling and going green. As we will hear today, e-waste is not just trash. These products contain precious materials like gold and copper, and it doesn't make sense to put gold in a dump. Over a dozen states now have legislation mandating proper e-waste disposal, and many electronic producers now offer take-back services. However, it's estimated that only 10 or 15% of these products reach recyclers. Clearly, much needs to be done to educate consumers about recycling and to make sure everyone has access to recycling. But raising awareness is not the only thing that can be done to tackle our growing pile of e-waste. Today, we will also hear about opportunities to design products to avoid end-of-life problems and to make product recycling more efficient and economically attractive. We must seriously look at the issue of reuse, and we find ways to safeguard against its downstream problems. We must also develop methods to adequately assess the economic and environmental impacts of e-waste and policies to manage it. This is a problem of global proportions. Technology and innovation have as much a role to play in solving it as they did in creating it. We don't want to stifle the innovation that has put the computer power of a room-sized mainframe into the palm of our hand, but we want to go forward with enough information and foresight to ensure that these problems, modern marvels, are not modern environmental problems. And now I would like to recognize Mr. Hall for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and you've adequately stated it. I'll be more brief than you were. You've covered the subjects, and you wonder where a lot of the e-waste is going to wind up. You know, mine winds up just as far as I can throw it every now and then. And my grandchildren get tired of me telling them, hellfire, I can take a Big Chief tablet and cedar pencil and figure out anything y'all can if you give me enough time. But It's an unusual panel, Mr. Chairman, and I really expect to get some good information from you. And I'm pleased that we're having a hearing. E-waste is the unintended consequence of a high-tech industry that's grown substantially since its beginning in the second half of the 20th century. And although consumer electronics comprise less than 2% of the municipal solid waste, it's really one of the fastest growing waste, I guess, streams, if you want to call it that, in the United States. According to the EPA, less than 20% of the e-waste is now recycled. Advancements in the consumer electronics field help create this growing amount of e-waste as electronics rapidly become obsolete. There are a lot of aspects to the e-waste dilemma. The definition of e-waste, the reuse and recycling of electronics, landfill disposal and hazardous waste, regulatory issues and economic economies. The complexity absolutely creates a vast array of opinions on possible solutions to the problems. And today's panel is well suited to help us explore the options before us, from recycling of e-waste to better design that will minimize the problem in the future. The House has passed H.R. 2850, which is a Green Chemistry Research and Development Act of 2008, authored by my friend Dr. Gingrey. I think this legislation was a step in the right direction, and like I said on the House floor at the time of its passage, advances in the research and development of green chemicals and products that will reduce the creation of substances that are harmful to our environment. This certainly applies to the problems with e-waste, and I look forward to hearing from the panel today and yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And with unanimous consent, Mr. Hall, I will ask for that at the end of this hearing, too, in case there are other folks that would like to ask questions. As you can see, things are relatively crowded up here, so we have staff both in the anterooms that are watching. This is being televised, as well as members that are also watching around. So we welcome your testimony, and at this time I would like to introduce our witnesses. Dr. Eric Williams is professor at Arizona State University. He holds a joint appointment in the Department of Civil Engineering and the School of Sustainability. And Mr. Gerardo Castro is the Director of Environmental Services for Goodwill Industries of Southern California. Ms. Renee St. Denis is Hewlett Packard's Director of Product Take-Back and Recycling Services for America. Mr. Eric Harris is Associate Counsel and Director of Government Affairs for the Institute of Scrap Metal Recycling. And Mr. Ted Smith is the Chairman of the Electronics Take Back Coalition. And finally, Mr. Michael Williams is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Sony Corporation. Our witnesses should know spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. We will start with Dr. Williams.
Chairman Gordon and other members of the committee, it is my pleasure to be here today to testify. Management of end-of-life of electronics is a new challenge. One reason is the rapid evolution of the technology. While new electronic products, like computers and cell phones, have as long a potential lifespan as traditional white goods, in practice they are considered obsolete very soon and replaced with new models. These discards are our e-waste. A second distinction is that the environmental intensity of manufacturing electronics is comparatively high. For example, it takes 4 times more energy to make a desktop computer than it consumes while plugged in home. In contrast, a refrigerator, most of the energy is used in operation. Manufacturing is a small share. Surprisingly, a computer's annual energy costs are higher than for a refrigerator if one includes manufacturing. Extending electronics lifespan thus could be an important strategy to mitigate environmental impacts. This does not mean that we should try to make do with slide rules or pocket calculators. Rather, robust markets for used electronics can help ensure that function are well matched with the needs and wants of users. A third challenge is how to manage substances of concern in electronics such as lead and brominated flame retardants. Much of the environmental concern concerning e-waste is about the potential for lead and other heavy metals to leach from e-waste in landfills. Circuit boards and cathode ray tubes are classified as hazardous waste according to, because they fail, EPA's TCLP leaching risk test. My colleagues and I at Arizona State University recently reviewed the literature, and our conclusion was that the risk of leaching from sanitary landfills is very small, if not negligible. The main reasons for this are, one, the TCBL test is considerably more aggressive than the leaching that actually occurs in landfills, and two, modern landfills have control systems to contain toxics that may leach out. In contrast, there is as yet no evidence that modern recycling of circuit boards and CRTs is environmentally preferable to landfilling. A fourth challenge is that the reuse and recycling of electronics is often a net cost in the United States, but in the developing world is a profitable business because the developing world has lower labor costs, higher demand for reused products and parts, and lower environmental protection. This results in a substantial export of end-of-life electronics from the U.S. and other developed countries to developing countries. The electronics reuse recycling industry is a double-edged sword for the developing world. On one hand, reuse markets provides access to technology which people could otherwise not afford. Low-cost computers and cell phones in particular enhance education and economic development. The recycling industry, the reuse and recycling industry employs thousands of people. On the other hand, the recycling of electronics is often done in developing countries via an informal industry. It is, in my opinion, by far the most serious environmental problem associated with end-of-life electronics. Yet there is as yet little action taken to improve health and safety conditions in this industry. I believe that it is important we work towards electronic product solutions and policies which aim at triple bottom line solutions: environmental, economic, and social benefits. While it is tempting to focus only on environmental issues, some environmental options have negative economic and social impacts for disadvantaged groups, leading to complex ethical choices. We need to understand the trade-offs between different options. An important part of moving forward is understanding what is really going on with reuse and recycling. One reason for the current lack of information is that reuse and recycling activities do not have their own industry or commodity codes, and thus are invisible to conventional statistics. Considering product design, alternate materials, using and developing alternate materials is an important strategy, but it is important to note that even a computer free of toxic substances would still be dangerous to recycle informally. Many of the toxics are generated or used in the recycling processes themselves. The design of information systems for products is much less discussed, but I think one of the major untapped opportunities to improve reuse and recycling. One idea is to place a radio frequency identification device into a computer to act as a black box, periodically recording the functionality of different systems. At the end of life, a computer arriving at a processing facility could be remotely scanned to test functionality and classified for reuse versus recycling. There are many other possibilities. To sum up, I am concerned that current policy directions around the world may not take us in the direction we want to go. I believe the U.S. should take a leadership role. Here are some suggested directions. 1. Investigate the pros and cons of different landfilling and recycling technologies to establish best practices. 2. Promote reuse domestically and abroad. 3. Cooperate with the developing world to mitigate the impacts of informal recycling. And 4. While the public discourse on electronics and the environment focuses on end-of-life issues, information technology has many important environmental applications which we should not neglect or ignore. So I and my colleagues at Arizona State University would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And Mr. Castro, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Gerardo Castro, and I am the Director of Environmental Services and Contracts for Goodwill Industries of Southern California. I am pleased to testify before the committee today on how we can best manage electronic waste. Goodwill Industries International is a network of 184 local, autonomous Goodwill agencies in the United States and 16 countries. We fund our mission through revenues collected from donated goods, as well as through industrial and workforce development contracts with government and the private sector. In 2007, my agency served more than 31,000 people with disabilities or vocational disadvantages through education, job training, and placement programs. We operate 54 retail stores, 40 attended donation centers, 3 campuses, and 21 workforce training centers. During the past decade, we have seen a growing number of computers and other electronic devices dropped off at our stores and donation centers. Nearly all of our agencies received discarded electronics. In 2004, local Goodwill agencies handled nearly 23 million pounds of electronics. With the transition to digital televisions, California expects 15 million television sets to be discarded next year. The problem of e-waste is a growing one, but it also represents a great opportunity. My views today represent those of my agency, Goodwill Industries of Southern California. In 2003, California became the first state in the nation to enact legislation which implemented strict standards for the disposal of e-waste, the California Electronic Waste Recycling Act, or SB 20 or SB 50. The program was later implemented in 2005. In 2007, my agency was able to divert a total of 4.6 million pounds of electronic waste out of county landfills. These products ranged from computers and monitors to printers and other peripherals. California is the only state which uses the advanced recovery fee model to pay for the costs associated with collecting, demanufacturing, and recycling covered electronic products. Retailers are required to collect a fee of $6 to $10, depending on the size of the screen, on any cathode ray tube, liquid crystal display, or plasma device sold in California. These fees go into a state recycling fund to reimburse authorized collectors and authorized recyclers. Collectors receive 20 cents per pound for picking up unusable CRTs and delivering them to recyclers, who get 28 cents for canceling them. Along with 9 other California Goodwills, we are a state-authorized e-waste collector. As an authorized e-waste collector, we process over 10,000 CRT units per month. We follow specific procedures in recycling e-waste. First, we recycle working computers by wiping the hard drives to Department of Defense standards, install new hard drives, and sell the refurbished units in our stores. These sales generate approximately 10% of our total e-recycling revenue. Another 70% comes from the dismantling and sale of plastic, metal, circuit boards, and other components to commodity dealers. The final 20% is obtained by taking unusable CRTs to state-authorized recyclers. Through our national network of 2,100 stores and 4,100 attended donation centers in virtually every community in America, Goodwill already has the capacity and infrastructure to provide for nationwide collecting of e-waste products. The federal government can encourage private sector investment and not-for-profit involvement in the used electronic recycling reuse market through tax credits for consumers and manufacturers who partner with social agencies, recycling grants, and other initiatives that help stakeholders solve this growing challenge. Goodwill Industries looks forward to working with the House Science Committee to support a national solution to handle e-waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. You and Goodwill should be congratulated on a very forward-thinking program. Now, Ms. Renee St. Denis from Hewlett Packard, you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, and members of the committee. My name is Renee St. Denis, and I'm the Director of Product Takeback for the Hewlett Packard Company in the Americas. HP has a long-standing history of being a leader in electronics recycling. We first began recycling electronics in 1987, and in 1994 we opened a world-class electronics recycling facility. In our 21 years of recycling electronics, we've recycled more than 1 billion pounds of electronics from our consumer, small and medium business, and enterprise customers. Quite an achievement. We also operate a state-of-the-art printer supplies recycling facility outside Nashville, Tennessee, in Chairman Gordon's district. All of the material that is recycled in all of our and our partners' U.S. operations are managed in an environmentally sound manner. No waste is exported for disposal overseas, and no electronic materials are sent to landfill. In addition to implementing programs on the ground and testifying before Congress, we have played a leading role in the policy development and debate about the end-of-life electronics in many states and indeed around the world. Based on our considerable experience, we believe that appropriate legislation can create efficient, flexible recycling systems that optimize the environmental impact, resource utilization, and economic benefits of electronics recycling. We look forward to continuing to work with the Congress on such legislation. We do see an increasing use of technology in the processing of electronic materials for recycling. Materials destined for recycling are first sent to a process where any materials requiring special handling, such as batteries or CRT glass, are removed and segregated for processing and treatment. At that point, large pieces of metals or plastics may also be isolated and segregated for recycling. The residual materials are sent through a series of size reduction and sorting steps. These steps include mechanical shredding and the use of high-tech material separation processes such as eddy currents, air tables, or magnetic separation. I'm pleased to report that HP's experience in designing and operating recycling facilities around the world have led us to incorporate much of our learning into new product design. For example, we have reduced the number and type of screws or fasteners used in new products, replaced paints and coatings on plastic parts with molded-in colors, and have successfully created a closed-loop recycling system for the plastics in our inkjet products. However, as an industry, we still face challenges in a number of areas, and we have provided suggestions for areas of research in our written testimony to help create a more efficient recycling infrastructure. I'd like to highlight a few of those today. In one example, there are materials which have been used in products in the past which no longer have economic value. These include CRT glass and plastics with brominated flame retardants. Congress should consider support for research into appropriate uses of these materials outside the technology industry. Another challenge is the inconsistent and somewhat inappropriate regulatory framework in place to manage used electronics. These products may be classified as hazardous waste due to the testing protocols used to assess the risk of managing them. The tests used to assess these risks were developed for assessing industrial wastes, not products that we routinely use every day in our homes and offices. The test can give misleading and contradictory results. The resulting regulatory classification that is put in place creates burdensome and costly regulatory requirements and impedes the development of a cost-effective recycling infrastructure while not creating any additional environmental protection. Congress could help to foster the development of an electronics recycling infrastructure by conducting research into the actual environmental and human health risks associated with storage, transportation, collection, and recycling of used electronics, and into the development of new appropriate testing protocols. Another slightly different area of research that the Congress may want to consider is the overall climate impact of recycling discarded electronics. There is currently little data on the net carbon impacts of collecting, transporting, and processing used electronics. Recycling can play a positive role in addressing climate change by conserving resources and displacing the energy associated with acquiring raw materials through mining or other processes. However, the process of recycling used electronics will also generate emissions of greenhouse gases and contribute to carbon change. In a future carbon-constrained world, all these impacts must be better understood. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our views. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. St. Denis, right on time, and Mr. Eric Harris is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Eric Harris. I'm here today representing ISRI, the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. ISRI is the world's largest trade association of recyclers, with 1,550 member companies and over 3,000 facilities throughout the United States. Our members process, broker, and industrially consume a number of recyclable commodities, including metal, ferrous and non-ferrous, paper, plastic, glass, textiles, tires and rubbers, and of course electronics. 20% of ISRI's membership now focuses on electronic recycling. In fact, it is our association's fastest growing segment. Our electronics recyclers provide comprehensive recycling operations, everything from logistics, including collection and transportation, to asset management, that is cleaning hard drives and testing and reselling for reuse, and of course processing electronic scrap to extract the various commodities such as steel and gold, titanium, silver, copper, and plastics and glass. for use as valuable materials in the feedstock and the manufacturing of new products. So what are some of the key challenges for electronics recyclers? The first, something very sensitive to our industry, is hosting this issue with the moniker of waste. In our opinion, scrap is not waste, and recycling is not disposal. It is very important to distinguish between scrap and waste, as well as recycling and disposal. Simply stated, scrap is the opposite of waste. Electronic scrap, like scrap paper and glass and plastic and metal and so forth, is not waste when responsibly recycled. Defining scrap electronics as waste undermines and overlooks the values that those electronics retained when properly recycled. One of the other biggest concerns we have in the industry is the cost to collect, transport, and responsibly recycle household electronic equipment, which remains the greatest challenge for our industry for two primary reasons. Household electronics, as Mr. Williams has already pointed out, some of the equipment has a negative cost to recycle. In other words, it costs more to recycle the equipment than the value you can extract from processing it. In addition, existing law, federal law, allows household electronic equipment to be sent to Subtitle D landfills. This creates a tension in the market because we lack the contractual connection with the consumer, and there's a behavioral pattern that suggests that this equipment should continue going to the landfill. Because of these reasons, until a sustainable market presents itself, ISRI does support a short-term financial mechanism from OEMs that would allow us to have help to collect, transport, and responsibly recycle those household electronic equipment goods that have a negative cost to recycle. For example, the cathode ray tubes in the televisions and monitors of today's market. There's three primary reasons why. This will enhance competition and not inflate the value of the recycling service that our members provide. The OEMs have greater access to their own customers. They can convince and educate their customers on the value of responsibly recycling the materials they sell. And lastly, it provides an incentive for the OEMs to design their products with an eye towards recycling. A great example in today's market is manufacturers' continued use of mercury in their products. If you see the flat screen monitors and televisions, if you take the time to refurbish that system, pull the back panel off, what you'll see is a row of fluorescent bulbs that have mercury powder. They're difficult to replace, and they're difficult to remove for recycling. As a result, they're not cost-effective in today's market. We need to encourage more collaborative programs to work with the OEMs to improve their design. On the commodity side, we need better markets for scrap plastics and scrap glass. CRT glass-to-glass manufacturing is becoming more and more obsolete throughout the world, and the few lead smelters that are remaining are actually refusing new contracts from recyclers to process their CRT glass. This is only complicated further by the 4 to 8 pounds of leaded glass that we see in the monitors and TVs entering in today's market. As a result, recyclers have fewer and fewer markets for the CRT glass. In our terms, this is a barn-burning issue. What do we do with the glass? For plastic, it remains difficult to separate and sort commingled plastic resins, streams to the quality that compete with virgin plastics. You have to imagine a truckload of commingled electronics, from toaster ovens to monitors to radios, shows up at our facilities, and now we have to process that material and process the plastic to a point where it can compete with virgin plastic. This is a challenge. All in all, what this does is creates hesitancy in the marketplace. Recyclers are hesitant to further invest in the technology needed for greater automation and optical sorting to address the CRT glass and the plastic. So how do we inject investor confidence? We would suggest targeted research and development to new in-use markets for mixed scrap plastic and glass, and potentially investment incentives for new recycling equipment, such as an accelerated depreciation model for new recycling equipment that is energy efficient and climate friendly, and designed to increase recyclable yields. And lastly, how do we find a responsible recycler? There's a spectrum of players on the market, from the leaders of our association all the way down to what we call the sham recyclers out there. Now, we would caution the committee for the need for new laws and regulations, and would encourage enhancing policy that rewards responsible recycling. And on our side of the equation, we have created a recycling industry operating standard, or RIOS, that is an integrated comprehensive management system that incorporates environment, health and safety, and quality goals for the recycler in tomorrow's market.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And Mr. Smith, you're recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify here today. My name is Ted Smith. I'm the chair of the Electronics Take Back Coalition. I am also the founder of Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition, former executive director there, which was formed 25 years ago to address the issues of health, environment, and the development of the electronics industry. I want to run through several slides very quickly. The problem, I think, is multifaceted, as you've heard. The products don't last very long. The equipment is toxic. More e-waste is thrown away than it is recycled. More recyclers simply export their products to developing countries, and the toxic components result from poor design, make e-waste hard to recycle. The shrinking lifespans is one of the serious issues that we face. New technology drives consumers to buy new products at astonishing rates. Prediction is 32 million new television sets will be sold this year, and 22 million new computers will be sold. And the February 17, 2009 digital conversion deadline is rapidly approaching. We predict that this is going to mean millions more televisions will be coming into our waste stream over the next few years. You've heard that e-waste is toxic: lead, mercury, cadmium, brominated flame retardants. Our landfills are beginning to fill up. It's still a small percentage of our landfill waste, but it's the fastest growing, as you've heard. And of all the equipment that's currently being collected, we predict that something like 87.5% is currently being trashed, and only 12.5% is being recycled. And this is the key. Of the products that are being recycled or collected for recycling right now, we estimate that 50 to 80% are being exported for processing in developing countries. And what this looks like is some of the most primitive processing you can imagine. There's video of this that I highly recommend if people have time to look at it. But what we know is that the products are being taken apart with hammers, and that they're being burned. They burn the plastics in order to get to the metals which have value. And when they burn the plastics, it's creating dioxin clouds, which are affecting the children and the communities throughout the developing world. This is happening in China, it's happening in Asia, it's happening in Africa. This is one of the biggest problems that we're facing right now, and I think the U.S. is primarily responsible for this. So what can Congress do? We do support strong producer responsibility. We've been working with state legislatures around the country. There's now almost a dozen states that have passed laws. Most of them are producer responsibility. We do think that we need to close the door on exporting the hazardous e-waste to poor countries, and we do need to promote a comprehensive green design initiative. Producer responsibility means electronic manufacturers should bear the responsibility throughout the product life cycle. This is a design initiative that started in Europe, which is now spread around the world, and we're working actively to bring into the U.S. We think that the legislation needs to include strong goals and timetables that drive increase in recycling, and we support federal legislation, but only if it's strong legislation and not lower than what's already happening in the states. And certainly we don't want to see a situation where the federal government would pass legislation, preempt the states, and have a lower standard than what's already happening out there. But primarily we think that the role of the federal government can focus on two things. It's preventing the export of the hazardous waste, because the states cannot address that. We know that there are good processing options that do exist in the U.S. and other developed countries, and we think that we do need to ban the export of the toxic e-waste so that we can prevent the harm that we know is going on. But the other major initiative that I'd like to talk to today is what we think that the federal government can do to encourage green design and green engineering. E-waste would not be an issue if the products themselves were not so toxic. And industry's efforts to green their products are increasing, but we think still inadequate compared to the rapid pace of the design changes. The manufacturers can design electronic products using green chemistry and green engineering principles, to make their products more durable, more upgradable, to be carbon neutral, fully recyclable, and requiring fewer unsustainable materials. We think that a national sustainable electronics initiative is the way to go, where we can combine some of the best thinking in the country from within industry, within academia, within government agencies, public health and environmental organizations to develop the new strategies, not only to address the problems of electronic waste, but also to really try to solve these problems at the front end, which we do think is the place where we need to do it. And we think that the new initiative could be composed of a National Clean Electronics Council, which would be a governing body, again, a multi-stakeholder body, as well as a National Clean Electronics Research and Development Fund funded by Congress. We think that the appropriate role could be to assess the current and future environmental and human health impacts, develop strategic plans to identify priority research needs, funding public and private research institutions, and to assure the diffusion and adoption of safer and cleaner technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And Mr. Williams, you're recognized.
Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, and distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of Sony Electronics and its employees, I'd like to thank you for providing us this opportunity to testify about Sony's environmental stewardship program. Sony has long been an industry leader in the design and manufacture of environmentally friendly information and consumer electronic products. Sony has now made even a stronger commitment to the environment when last September Sony launched the first national comprehensive electronics recycling initiative in the United States. Our program provides customers free recycling of any of their unwanted Sony products, from a Trinitron television to a PlayStation to even a Sony Ericsson mobile cell phone. Under our program, Sony takes full manufacturer responsibility for all products that bear the Sony name, and we will recycle Sony products at no cost to the consumer. Or, the way I explained it to my 83-year-old mother, if we make it, we take it. To carry out our nationwide take-back program, Sony contracted with Waste Management to establish 138 drop-off locations throughout the country. Our goal is to have 150 drop-off locations with at least one recycling center in each state by this September. Our long-term goal is to have a collection location within 20 miles of 95% of the U.S. population. In addition to establishing these permanent locations, we also work with our local retailers and local municipalities to have recycling events. We have planned 50 of those events this year. Since last September, our program has collected almost 7 million pounds of consumer electronic products. Our 5-year goal is to collect 600 million pounds. In summary, Sony has set a goal for itself to collect 1 pound of recycled product for every pound that we sell. Sony wants to make the recycling of our products as easy for the consumers as it is purchasing them. Mr. Chairman, we believe this is a path to sustainability. But our environmental work at Sony doesn't stop at collection. All Sony products collected must be recycled using the strictest environmental standards. We seek at least 95% recycling rates. In addition, we provide full public accountability of where and how our waste material is disposed. We seek to reuse as much material as possible, and we prohibit the exportation of hazardous waste to developing countries. But Sony's environmental efforts are also forward-looking as well. We continue to introduce a variety of environmentally friendly electronic products. And today I brought along 2 examples, the Sony Ereader and our OLED television. Now, the Sony Ereader, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Hall, and members, is a unique on-the-go reading experience. This little book, this little tablet can hold up to 160 novels. And with its rechargeable battery, you can have 7,500 page turns. And if you're like me, sometimes I forget to bring my reading glasses. You can even press a button and it changes the size of the font. But just think of how much paper, how much energy is saved with an e-reader product. I've also brought along our OLED television. This television stands OLED, organic light emitting diode. It is only 3 millimeters thick, or I should say 3 millimeters thin. It represents the latest in Sony display technology. And it's also exceptionally energy efficient. The OLED technology can result in reduced power consumption of up to 40% per square panel inch. And because we use organic polymers in this display, it does not have any mercury or lead. So, Mr. Chairman, these are just two products that Sony's doing today. Coupled with our stewardship program, our full producer responsibility take-back program, we believe this is the path that companies should take. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before this committee, and Sony looks forward to working with you in developing a successful national e-waste program.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I hope it'll be a few years, but I've got a TV I'm going to bring back to you one of these days.
Not a problem, Mr. Chairman.
At this point, we will open the first round of questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I'm not going to take that. What I'm going to do is ask, and many of you have been responsive already, I'm going to submit questions to you and ask your suggestions on any type of federal research that might be beneficial both in the back end of recycling or the front end in developing technologies to make it easier to recycle on the back end. And then I also will ask you about any other type of federal programs you think could expedite this. Your really testimony has been very good. And now I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Ms. Richardson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions, and I'd also like to, I think I'll only get through a couple if I could submit the rest into the record. My first question is, I was very appealing of Mr. Castro. First of all, I represent Southern California, and several of your sites are in my district, so welcome to Washington. One of our major issues regarding these recycling programs is the cost. California is the only state, as you mentioned, sir, with a consumer fee to pay for recycling. Almost all other states have a manufacturer take the responsibility for the recycling cost. Which ones of these models would you recommend would be best? And this question is for both Ms. Denis and I think Mr. Williams. My question is on the advanced recovery fee in California.
Thank you for your question. In our experience with the model in California and the models that have been developed in other states, we find that where the manufacturers are more directly involved in the recycling processes, as they are in other parts of the world, the systems become more efficient. We are much more tied to actually doing the recycling ourselves or having it done on our behalf. I'm sure Mr. Smith would agree that the more we're involved in the recycling, the more we're motivated to find alternatives to some of the materials of concern that are in the products. The system in California has proved to be somewhat inefficient. There is a need for an increase in the fees that was discussed at a meeting earlier this week, and increasing those fees from a range of $6 to $10 to a range of $10 to $30. And we see that as a burden on current consumers that is really going to pay for the waste of former consumers. And so we're much more in favor of the producer responsibility systems that we're seeing develop in other states.
Well, Ms. Denis, according to your testimony, HP, your only your recycling rate for 2007 was 15%. So it sounds like to me you could use a little help. So wouldn't you think maybe a combination of the two, maybe a fee that the consumer pays directly and then also a portion that you are involved with? Because 15% isn't satisfactory.
Well, so the 15% is predicated on one very important factor, and that is the behavior of the consumer. The California system also does not provide neither system provides direct incentives to the customers to recycle the electronics. So we do recycle everything customers want to give us. Another important fact to note is that none of the recycling that takes place in California is counted in that 15% number because we don't do the recycling ourselves. It's handled by state agencies. So we can't count that. The 15% reflects only what we do ourselves, which, again, is what we're seeing in the states that have legislation emerging. The first of those actually took effect in large scale in Minnesota this year. So you'll see that number go up.
Ms. Denis, maybe I'm not clear. What I thought you said in your answer to the advance recovery fee was that it would be better served if you were more engaged and involved. And then when I reference the area that you are engaged and involved, it's only 15% of what you're saying, your role of what you're doing. So what would you, let me ask it in a different way. What would you do to suggest of how we could increase that number or increase consumer education to assist you?
So I think one thing that's important is to educate the consumer about the need to recycle these products when they're done with them. We find that they're often stored for long periods of time before they enter into the recycling system. And when we have events, much like the one that you had here last weekend, there's overwhelming demand for this service. So people show up with a lot of things to recycle, but they often don't know that systems exist. We manufacturers often advertise this fact as part of our new sales, but there is a lack of understanding in the sort of the general population that they have a responsibility to start these products on the way to the appropriate recycling solution. There also are states where these products can still be landfilled, and so in many cases those products escape what we think of as the kinds of systems that we put in place.
And Mr. Williams, what's your thought on the advance recovery fee? And I'm down to my last minute.
Yes, ma'am. In terms of the advanced recovery fee, in the past we have supported that, but since then, as you can tell from my testimony, we believe in producer responsibility. We make it, we'll take it back, we'll take responsibility for the product. That being said, the issue with advanced recovery fees is the money being collected to address legacy issues, manufacturers have gone out of business, or the current players in the marketplace. Moreover, with advanced recovery fees, not all state governments are fiscally responsible. The money may be collected on the sale of a television, but if it goes into the general fund, we don't know where that money is going to be 10 or 15 years from now when we may need it. That's where we think federal legislation in this area is essential. I should say, moreover, not only should the producer take responsibility, but other stakeholders have to be involved to make this successful. We need the retailers to be involved and have a stake in this outcome, as well as consumer education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. As usual, you have very good questions, and Mr. Hall is recognized for 5 minutes.
Because we're only about 10 minutes away from the Irish I won't ask questions, but I will yield to Mr. Bartlett, who I think has some interesting questions involving Dr. Gingrich's bill. I yield my time to you, Roscoe.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your testimony. As I sat here thinking about what I might say or ask you, I really was in quite a quandary, because what we're dealing with is really a self-inflicted wound, a self-inflicted problem. We have recycling problems. We have huge energy costs in making this equipment that we then throw away. We have big environmental problems. Much of this equipment is made with planned obsolescence. You just expect the people very shortly to throw it away. You design it to dispose of it. You don't design it so that it can be repaired or upgraded. And we behave as if resources are unlimited, like there's unlimited amount of energy. This morning I noted that in every one of the papers I looked at in our Hill newspapers that the major headline on the front page of every one of them had to deal with energy and the high cost of gasoline. Everybody is being blamed, and the person that really to blame for this is the millions of us who are out there riding around in our SUVs. The supply just is greater than the demand. It's a simple supply-demand problem, which is why the price of gasoline is up. I said this was a self-inflicted problem, and it really is. Much of the equipment this electronic equipment that is sold is bought with discretionary money. You just don't need it. And we have to trade off in our society today. What is more important? To spend more time with these silly games, or to use less energy so there'll be more of it available for our kids and our grandkids? And yet we have a huge beast to feed out there. We have this huge industry that's making this stuff, and if you aren't buying it and throwing it away, they aren't making it. How do we resolve this problem? What do we do? I have 10 kids, 16 grandkids, and 2 great-grandkids. We're handing them a huge debt, not with my votes, if you look at my voting record. Wouldn't it be nice if we left them a little energy? I'm having a big problem with a society that just wants to consume profligate spending, just play, 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 with no thought for tomorrow, no thought for your kids, no thought for your grandkids. And here we are today talking about a problem which is almost totally self-inflicted. You know, if people need to work, why can't they work rebuilding this equipment and repairing it, rather than just throwing it away? There's no reason, for instance, that we don't have frames on cars anymore. When we used to have a frame, no reason that wouldn't last 100 years. Why does it have to go to the junkyard in 16 or 18 years? You know, these things are not limitless. There is a limit to the amount of energy that's out there. There is a limit to the amount of these metals and so forth that are out there. There is a limit to the capacity of the environment to absorb all of these things. How do we reach a balance in this so that we aren't looking just to the next election, pandering to people so we'll get elected, so that we aren't looking just to the next quarterly report so that it'll look good, so that your stockholders will feel good about you and invest even more money in you? How do we strike a balance that looks long-term to the future?
I could start a response. I think I agree with everything you said, and I think that the strategy of trying to bring in a producer responsibility approach into the U.S. and really importing that policy initiative from Europe and elsewhere is at least a part of the solution, because what that does is to internalize the cost of production into the full life cycle of the product. And if the producers have to be responsible for those costs throughout the entire life cycle, they're going to tell their designers, you know, let's figure out a way to make these products last longer, be more efficient, and be less expensive throughout the life cycle. So the point is that if they have to pay for the costs of recycling and disposal, we think that that's going to send some important design signals up to the front end where it really belongs. It will help shift that focus. It's probably not going to solve all the questions that you're raising, because I do think that the rapid obsolescence is the major thing. You probably know of Moore's Law, which was based on Gordon Moore, one of the founders of the semiconductor industry. If you look at the slope of change in the industry, it looks like this. It's a logarithmic scale going straight up to the sky. When you look at the slope of the environmental and social improvements that we have, it's a much shallower slope like this. I think our job is to try to figure out how to make those slopes be coincidental. And right now, we're way out of whack on that, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And Mr. Hall is recognized for a unanimous consent request.
Chairman, EPA has provided a written statement to us, and I ask unanimous consent that the statement be included in the written record, and that any questions members might have for EPA and their answers also be included. Now, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and I'll raise you one. Mike Thompson, the chairman of the E-Waste Caucus, also has a statement that he would like to submit, and I ask unanimous consent that that be made a part of the record.
Object.
I think he's kidding.
I withdraw my objection.
If there's then, since there's no objection, those two records will be made part of the record. And Mr. Lipinski, you can close this out.
Do we really have any time, Mr. Chairman?
Well, we don't have much. If you want to have one question or a statement.
I just want to say that there has to be some way of working this in. Very, very quickly, one thing that I find difficult is not knowing as a consumer what what needs to be recycled. I had a VCR and I wasn't sure, can I throw this in the trash? What do I do with this? So the information to begin with, and what is it? Very quickly, Mr. Williams, why does Sony take this step? Why is Sony doing as much as you are doing?
It's the right thing to do, in number one. Number two, because it makes sense. You're being the responsible producer. You hope that people have brand loyalty and that you take responsibility for your product. I want to design and build in, as Ted was talking about earlier, in terms of market efficiency. If I know it's going to be recycled, I'm going to design it with parts and machinery with that in mind. So it makes sense for us from an economic point of view to recycle the products, to create recycled waste for, let's say, example, plastic. So I have enough of supply of post-consumer recycled plastic that I can use in my new models. And so we have to create the supply of the recycled material in order to put it into our new products. The way we do that is to get our consumers who have the Sony products to bring them to us and to recycle that. So it's in our interest, it's in the environment's interest to do what we're doing today, and also to educate the American public that going green is good for business, it's good for the environment. It's a win-win situation, but it's going to take some work and effort on the part of Congress through initiative, legislation, and on the part of industry to educate the American consumer why it's in everyone's interest to recycle responsibly and properly.
I commend Sony on that, but I agree that there's more that we're going to have to do to make sure this is done across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our witnesses for testifying today. Mr. Hall also would like to know where to take his Victrola.
I don't think that is a Sony brand on it.
Is RCA still, are they still in business? The record will remain open for additional statements from members and for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witness. And let me ask, is there anyone that wants to ask the witnesses to come back after the joint hearing? If not, then I want to thank our witnesses. We're going to submit additional questions to you. This is an issue that this committee is very interested in, and we consider this one of our major areas of concern this year. And as I say, we're interested in knowing on the federal level, if there is, we're not looking to do something if there's not something there to do, what we can do in terms of research to help on the recycling end, and if there is something on the front end to make it easier to recycle, as well as other areas. So with that, the witnesses are excused and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, buddy.
I'll hang on to it.